Sarah, whose kids are those? Oh, okay. That's right. Now I recognize them.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are live downtown Las Vegas with Brant Thornton. Lovely to see you again, Brant. Thanks for joining me here.
You bet.
So, Brant, the first thing I want to ask you, we've got so many new subscribers on Crowdsource the Truth, and I personally, of course I was aware of the standoff and the whole situation with the Bundy family, but I think a lot of people are very unclear on the details. Can you take us back to the very beginning? How did this all come about?
Well, you know, it depends how far you want to go back, but you can go to the Taylor Grazing Act around 1940, and you know, preemptive rights, prior appropriation rights, recognized by the Constitution of the United States and reaffirmed by the Taylor Grazing Act. Then in the early 90s, the United States government decided to reinterpret the Enclave Clause in the Constitution of the United States, specifically Article 1, Section 8, and Clause 17. Along with that, the Property Clause found in the Constitution. So much of it revolves around the word to dispose of. And basically what happened when they reinterpreted that in the early 90s, they claimed total ownership over all of these lands.
The federal government?
The federal government claimed total ownership. So
what changed in the 90s that caused this to all happen? They changed the law about...
It pretty much revolves around a new interpretation of the word to dispose of in the Enclave Clause of the Constitution of the United States. Then, you know, over a period of time, these ranchers would sign a contract, all right? And it was a contract for certain, you know, services from the Bureau of Land Management. The big one, what it primarily started out with, was to prevent range wars, to define certain lines, the lines of grazing rights and water rights, which was, you know, that was all legitimate.
So to prevent fighting between the ranchers, the government would say, your cows can hang out over here, this other guy's cows hang out over here.
Sure.
Okay.
So they did have a function and a purpose initially.
The BLM.
The BLM, the Bureau of Land Management. And but in the early 90s, we had a lot of lawsuits that got started from your different eco groups that claimed that there was, you know, for example, the tortoise was endangered,
right,
and it had to be protected and preserved. And you know, they got that funding from the government to sue the government, which you know, we basically financed that whole thing through our taxes. So it's pretty insidious the way the whole thing works out. They get grants, all right, and then with certain portions of that money and through donations, they use it to sue the government on behalf of these eco groups, and then there's strings attached to that. So in the early 90s, they decided to go after Clive and Bundy. Okay.
Why did they decide to go after him?
Well, I think, you know, that's probably the million-dollar question. We know that Harry Reid was very much involved in claiming or taking these lands and selling them off to the Chinese, the EEN. So that was a big thing right there. That was a $5 billion arrangement with Harry Reid's son and that law firm.
And what is it that the Chinese intend to do with all this land?
Well, see, we never really did know. It was supposed to be for a solar farm, but there's so many other things that were attached to that were going on.
Mineral rights and things like this.
Mineral rights, all kinds of things. That it looked like it was more of a cover than anything else. For the real goal, it appears, was after the uranium and any other precious minerals that they had there. And so they're using EEN for a cover. That's what it really looks like.
Okay. So 1990s, lawsuits begin. Harry Reid has some sort of an arrangement where he's trying to build a solar farm that's being funded by a Chinese corporation or the Chinese government?
EEN.
EEN.
Yeah.
Okay. So how did we get to the point that there was this armed standoff between the Bundy family and the FBI or whoever it was?
Well, the Bureau of Land Management was the spearhead. They came in like gangbusters, way overkill.
When was it that they first started showing up?
That would be, if you think here, it's around the end of March of 2014.
And what exactly happened?
They started to build they built a compound, but that's when they got started, was like towards the end of March. They built a compound in the Tokwa Wash, which is just off of I-15, and that would be the southbound I-15. And they hired these contract cowboys to help with the roundup.
Of the cattle.
Of the cattle.
And what was the idea? They're rounding up the cattle and saying, whose cattle were they rounding up? Bundy's?
Yeah, it was supposed to be a court order, fulfilling a court order, and
court order saying
they called them trespass cattle.
Cattle are no longer allowed. So they say it's federal land. Bundy's say they own the land.
Well, the Bundys say what they actually own, and it is recorded here in Clark County, Nevada, at the Clark County Courthouse, is they own the water rights and the grazing rights, just as much as, if you own your home or your vehicle, if it's paid off. But they own those through preemptive rights and even possibly prior appropriation.
Okay.
Okay. So preemptive rights, let's talk a little bit about prior appropriation. Everybody's heard of the San Francisco 49ers football team.
Sure.
Well, the 49ers was the miners that showed up in the gold rush in 1848.
Right.
And it was really interesting. That was considered a priority appropriation by the United States government, and is to create incentive. You could make a claim, and that claim was yours. Okay, at that time it was a territory. So, but it was called a prior appropriation because at that particular time the United States government desperately needed precious metals for their monetary system and other things that were taking place at that time.
Right.
So now California became a state, an actual state in after the gold rush, which was like 1850. Interesting enough, those claims came under basically the claim of the state of California. They tried to, and the United States government says you can't do that. Okay, these claims, prior appropriation, these claims belong to these individuals, and you can't touch them. And I always use that because it's a very good example. We have 200 years of precedents in 38 states that all got their sovereignty in the same way. And so, but somewhere along the lines, our elected officials became lazy and they didn't enforce those claims on those lands. The state of Nevada is a perfect example. So, but then when you become a state, and that's a process, and maybe I'll get in a little bit into that process. When the territory was going to become a state, all right, there's tremendous logistics that is involved with that whole thing. And
right.
Congress declared, and our government and Congress, rightly so, declared all control over the territories until it would become a state. Well, they have to define the boundaries of this state. So the different things that go into defining the boundary primarily is the resources, and the big one is water. There's no sense in trying to have a sovereign state if it's just going to go BK, if it's going to go bankrupt. So what they did is throughout the territories, and actually sent this over, internationally, that you had to get your claim in on these lands. If you were a foreign government, if you had investments here, a vested interest, you had to put your claims in to Congress. If you're an indigenous peoples, you had to put your claims in Congress. Here in the state of Nevada, we had the Basque, which came from Spain. They had to put their claims in, which some of them did. So this is just an example. And if you didn't have your claims in by a certain time, you forever relinquished all rights to these lands. Okay, and that's in the property clause. Okay. So this was published and put out throughout the territory. Now, once you got your claims in and it was recognized, that became a prior appropriation, okay, or a priority appropriation. The indigenous peoples had a little different setup. That was what they called.
Why didn't the Native Americans just say, hey, we claim all this land?
Well, that's, I think they're pretty much at the mercy of the United States government at that time, and because you had the pioneers that come over, they're making their claims. You had a lot of people that were trying to divide this pie up.
Sorry, just adjust this up a little bit. There we go.
So, and that's a good point, and it's one that I've often thought of, but I think they were pretty much so browbeaten at that time that they weren't going to claim all the lands. They knew, I would guess that they knew they couldn't. So you had the prior appropriations, and then it became a sovereign state. Better digress a little bit. They had to have the state legislature set up, their postal system set up, the law enforcement was the sheriffs. All that stuff had to be set up. Plus, you had to have 60,000 people, which is
become a state.
Become a state, which is very interesting because we never did. The state of Nevada, a battle-born state, never did get the 60,000. But because President Lincoln was so desperate to solidify his re-election.
I know, I hated that.
That one of them off.
No, keep going.
Okay, to solidify that re-election, that he pushed very hard for the state of Nevada to become a state because he knew that it would be a state that would support Abraham Lincoln.
Keep going, that's all right.
So then after he became a state...
Please don't touch it.
After he became a state, you had people like the ancestors of the Bundys that were coming in, correct?
Yeah.
And then it became a preemptive rights, all right? Because they still wanted to settle all this vast lands that we had out here. In fact, Congress desperately wanted to settle these lands because they were fearful that other countries would come in and make claims, and actually we would end up being engaged in warfare to keep these lands. So desperately they wanted this all settled. That's when you had, they'd give you the Homestead Act, and you start off with 160 acres. It could go all the way to 600 acres, something like that. Go west, young man, go west, young man. So then when you would there was three things, and sometimes I get this wrong because some people say there was actually only two things you had to do, because that would be a preemptive right, which is a little bit different. But if you wanted to stake a claim for your future farm or your future ranch, there's a couple of things. One is you had to stake your claim and it had to be recorded, okay? The other things you had to do is you had to defend that claim, all right? And that's when we get into some battles with some of the indigenous peoples or other claim jumpers. You've heard this statement, they would be claim jumpers.
So the claim is you just say, hey, this is my land?
Well, more than that, you had to be recorded. Okay,
had to go to City Hall and say,
yes,
hey, this
is the courthouse, and you had to give your longitude, latitude, all the numbers, and then it would be recorded, which you can see it would be a little bit difficult to get that very precise.
But also, how does it, somebody just shows up and says, this is my land, right? Mm-hmm. And then unless someone says, no, it's not, it's mine.
Well, here's the third thing you had to do. You had to make beneficial use of the land for the general population. In other words, you couldn't just, you had to work the land. You just couldn't make a claim on it.
So
you
it's
had
a
to
farm, it's a cattle ranch.
Yeah, you had to stake your claim, then you had to work the land, and it had to be beneficial use for the general public,
right,
or the citizens of the United States. So now all that is recorded, and it's always been that way. Like I said, we had a precedence of 200 years, and 38 states had all obtained their sovereignty in the same exact way.
And the Bundy family had obviously staked a claim on this land, recorded it. They were ranching cattle on there, so it was beneficial to the economy and people who want to eat beef and have milk and all the things like that.
And a real interesting point is when Cliven was trying to get him into state court for preemptive rights, the federal court came out and said, we will not win on that basis. On preemptive rights, we will lose.
So what initiated the lawsuit between Cliven Bundy and the U.S.
It was
government?
your eco groups. You know what I'm talking about, eco groups that wanted to supposedly protect the turtle. And then, of course, you had this reinterpretation of everything.
But you seem to not believe that they were actually trying to protect a turtle.
No, when you really get down to it and you look at the corporations and how they're all connected, it's amazing. They all end up going back to really just one source or a group of sources, all these corporations. So it became a sophisticated way of stealing the land from the people.
So some corporation said, hey, this land, it's got minerals, it's got all kinds of stuff. We don't need these cows here. Let's get these Bundy guys out of the way. How do we do this? Oh yeah, there's a turtle here. Let's fund this eco group and they'll push out the turtle.
And that's just one way. You know, if we go to Uranium One, which is the center, right in the middle of this whole thing, go to Dwight and Stephen Hammond Ranch. And I was involved with that at the protest in the Malheur Refuge, and was able to see with my own two eyes what they had done to Dwight and Stephen Hammond. Now, they got them in court and tried them for domestic terrorism arson. I sat within 10 feet of two outfitters who said they actually saw the Bureau of Land Management start the fires that ultimately Dwight and Stephen Hammond were accused of. That same information went to the prosecuting attorney and the defense attorney. The prosecuting attorney was Papagni. That information was given to them. This is the statement that we have from the sworn statement, and they buried it, absolutely buried it. In fact, Papagni came out and threatened, himself personally came out and threatened these two outfitters. So this corruption runs so deep. They've all been able to benefit financially from it. They've set up their little sophisticated hedge funds in all. We know that Anna J. Brown owns a lot of that land that the Bureau of Land Management stole. We know that Harry Reid owns a lot of the land that the Bureau of Land Management stole here in southern Nevada. So they've got this sophisticated thing set up where they can steal the land, steal all the minerals, get kickbacks from it from the corporations that they enable to go in and mine. So yeah, and so much of this is going out of the country too. Like for example, Uranium One used to be Rosatom. Okay, it's a Russian.
Well, it was sold to Rosatom.
Yes,
yeah.
and all the so those minerals and all the money is going someplace entirely different. Okay, they're taking our natural resources and then giving them to these corporations. In this case, it's a foreign corporation, and then through the back door, the kickbacks go to the politicians.
It's the same thing we're hearing about all around the country. I think a lot of people, I'm from New York, so obviously the standoff, the whole Bundy issue was in the news, but I personally didn't follow it as much as I am now.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, we see the way the corporate media operates. They try to paint you guys as gun-loving, you know, nationalists and terrorists and alt-right and whatever they want to try to call you. And this is why I like to come out and talk to people face to face to hear the details. And of course, there are people out there in the crowdsourced community who are on both sides of this issue.
Sure.
And I want to hear the opposing views to come forward as well. So we've got a good basis here for how this all started. How did it come to the members of the Bundy family being incarcerated and being here in court?
Well, that was kind of a grassroots thing. You know, you had your mainstream media out there when Hammond got tased. Well, let's back up.
How did that happen? Yeah.
Well, let me back up even a little before that. First of all, you had Davy Bundy. Davy Bundy is one of Cliven's sons.
Right.
Who was out there on Riverside Road, decided to film with his smartphone the Bureau of Land Management rounding up his father's cattle. And the BLM and the federal government decided they owned that road and everything around it. You could not get off that road. You couldn't get out of your vehicle. And so what they did is they arrested him on the spot, beat him up, ground his face into the dirt.
Trespassing on a public road.
On a public road.
So that was the first shot fired in the battle of BLM versus Bundy. Was the son says, hey, I'm going to document this with my smartphone, much in the same way I'm doing with Crowdsource the Truth. He's attempting to be essentially a citizen journalist. Right. And they don't like that, so they physically beat him up.
Yep. And then they took him, they held him overnight at the compound, the BLM compound in Tocopwash.
Now, what is that BLM compound? It's sort of a federal prison of some kind?
No, it was a makeshift thing that they threw up, basically just to keep the cattle confined. But they had offices out there. They had some buildings out there, generators.
So just locked him in an office.
Yeah, yeah. And so they put him in there overnight.
Isn't that wrongful imprisonment? Or
absolutely. It gets better. They were intimidating him and mocking him and all kinds of things while he was there. The next day they bring him here to Las Vegas. Metro, the police department, and Metro says he didn't commit any crimes.
Really?
We're not taking him. You're not going to lock him up here. So they took him to Henderson. I think I got that backwards. I think they went to Henderson first, but I'm not sure. Did the same thing there. Henderson Police Department said he didn't break any crimes, any laws. He didn't commit any crimes. We're not going to lock him up. So they just dumped him out on the street. And found somebody with a cell phone and called his dad, said, hey, they kicked me out on the street.
I mean, it's shocking. They basically
Well, it's
kidnapped
really
the guy.
shocking when you stop and consider a couple of years later, they arrest him. They didn't have any grounds to hold him at that time or arrest him 2 years prior. So then they SWAT him up there in northern Utah.
What do you mean they swat him?
With 40 member SWAT team. Well, he's working on building his new house.
Why did the SWAT team show up?
Make it as big and as dramatic as you possibly can.
So
it's all about drama.
Wait a minute. So the Bureau of Land Management says cops arrest this guy. Cops say no. They just release him. Goes back to his home. He's ranching. He's doing his thing. And then the SWAT team shows up?
2 years later, SWAT team shows up, arrest him.
But nothing at all happened to initiate the SWAT team showing up?
Nothing.
Wow.
Nothing. And they didn't even, from what we understand, he didn't even have an arrest warrant for him at that time. And so many of these men, they did not have arrest warrants. They got them after the fact. So next thing you know, he's been in jail for prison for like 2 years waiting for trial. They would not let him out on pretrial release. They denied him bail, his 8th Amendment rights. 6th Amendment, his right to speedy trial. It just goes on and on and on.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we've got Davey, we've got Ryan, and we've got Cliven all incarcerated for a year and 9 months.
And Ammon too, Bundy, and Mel Bundy. So you got 5 of them total.
Dave and Mel also.
Yeah. They've been in prison all this time, denied their 6th and 8th Amendment rights. Actually, even more than that. But
wow.
Those are the ones that really jump off the page.
Huh. Now, so yesterday I was in the hearing there, and we had this evidence presented where, well, there was a witness who spoke about seeing these cameras on the land that the witness described as looking like a football. And I mean, this is the amazing part of Crowdsource the Truth, is that somebody saw that live stream yesterday, and they went and identified this football-looking camera that has a laser on it, because Ryan actually stood up during the proceedings and said there was a laser on the thing. We got a really good description of this camera that was sitting on the ground. That's how it was described. And this football-shaped camera is designed to rest on the ground. One of the accessories they sell is a little kind of like a stand for it to just sort of sit there on the ground. And I mean, I've never seen a more football-esque camera than that.
Yeah, it looks like a football.
So they came in there, they set up surveillance, they're surveilling the house. The government has said that the Bundys have put out false information, and the false information being they felt like they were surrounded, and that's why they got armed, right? Am I understanding this correctly?
That's correct. That is correct.
So there's this sophisticated surveillance equipment that most people have never seen before, this football with a laser on it. What the hell is that? It could be a bomb, it could be a...
Sure.
And it's night vision. That laser is apparently night vision.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you think is going to happen today? We had that hearing yesterday where it seemed like the judge was now allowing some of this evidence about the cameras to come forward. The government had said that nothing from the cameras was recorded, but it was live streamed to 3 different locations. Now, in looking up this camera, I've determined some of its capabilities, which are live streaming to up to 20 locations at a time. It has an internal recording capability on an SDXC memory card, which is a very, very tiny memory card that could have easily have been removed. But it's hard for me to imagine that someone would set up such a sophisticated piece of equipment and just not record anything that it's doing. And that's what the prosecutor was so adamantly repeating yesterday, was that it wasn't recorded, there are no recordings, they can't give discovery. I mean, isn't it so easy for the government or someone in the government to just take that memory chip and say, oh, it wasn't recorded on a server. They're very careful about how they worded it. It wasn't recorded on a server. They didn't say anything about an SDXC memory card or internal memory on the camera.
Well, you know, some years ago, Supreme Court ruled that you have the right to privacy. Okay, and that equipment right there, I'll bet you anything could penetrate the walls into somebody's home.
We don't know about that capability, but it's got a 36x zoom lens. It could zoom right in the window.
And it's still invasion of your privacy, which the Supreme Court ruled. It's been like at least 20, 30 years ago that you have the right to privacy.
Right.
And I think that might be the big thing that's coming into play here, is they have been denied their right to privacy. But there's other things also. You know, they have the snipers out there, they have the snipers on the hills, and they could have all been tuned into that camera, all right? And anytime it's live streaming and you got snipers on the hills, that's a huge red flag to me, okay? I believe they're looking for targets.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I believe they're looking for targets.
We've heard that there might have been as many as 3 of those cameras, or certainly that camera in 3 different locations.
Yeah.
Someone else described a folder structure that showed 4 different folders that seemed to indicate 4 cameras. Now, someone was giving testimony, or I think the defense attorney was talking about a witness that he wanted to call, that he expected would give testimony that the camera had the capability of 4.
4. Well, then, you know, before I forget too, I want to take this a step further.
Yes.
In one of the quotes from Dan Love is that this will be another Waco, Texas. Okay.
What did he mean by that?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious. What, they killed like 80-something people and burned them out, and that was their intentions. They intended to wipe that whole family out. We know through discovery that they had desperately tried to incite the Bundy family to violence over and over and over again.
How did they do that?
Well, you know, the big one, of course, is when they just showed up a bunch of snipers and then they started arresting people with no arrest warrant, no cause, no probable cause. So that's when they escalated. But prior to that, there was other things that they were doing. You know, there was, of course, you had Davy Bundy, and that arrest took place. But there was other people even before that, family members that were over towards Overton, where they did the same thing, roughed them up and arrested them also as they had. So they were doing it in increments and ratcheting it up all the time. And I personally believe very strongly, having been there during that whole thing, that they was pushing for a false flag.
What do you mean?
Well, at the demonstration area, when you had Gillespie, Sheriff Gillespie, get up and talk, it was very curious this way he presented everything to the crowd.
How did he do it?
He said, you know, the Bureau of Land Management is ceasing operations. There's a press release out right now that the Gold Butte area is going to be opened up. And every time you'd say something like that, the crowd would just really, really clap their hands and get loud. And you know, it basically told us that the cattle are being released now. All right, the Gold Butte was totally opened up.
So they kidnapped the cattle that were grazing?
They had already rounded up something like 300 or 400 cattle.
And where do they put them?
They put them in that compound over there.
So they lock them in behind a fence, and you guys don't have access to your cattle?
Right.
Stealing the cattle, basically.
Stealing the cattle. So we were all under the definite impression, it's over with, go get the cattle. But here's what happened. As the sound levels started to go down, he started speaking more in a hushed tone. All right, and somebody said, well, what about the cattle? He said, well, that's one of the things, and it got real kind of quiet. I'm going to talk to Cliven about. But everybody else always heard, and myself included, heard everything. The cattle are being released. The cattle are coming home. See, so there again, we get up there, and you got MRAPs. You got MRAPs coming down the road.
What's MRAPs?
It's military equipment full of SWAT teams. Okay.
Armored vehicle.
What is it?
Armored vehicle.
Yeah, it's an armored vehicle. So you get up there, and here you got the BLM stacked in a I don't know what to call it, where they stack them. It's an aggressive type of an attitude towards us, with guns pointed at us. All right. And you got here you got all the sheriff's department and the MRAPs coming up too. Nobody expected that. We totally expected to go there and see the gates open and the cattle released.
Right.
And we get there and it's something entirely different from what the sheriff had just said.
Uh-huh.
So now here we go again. Are they trying to provoke us into a shooting war? And that's clearly
the second one bullet gets fired, they shoot
or a
everybody.
backfire. And there was a lot of firearms on both sides there. And I personally believe the way they positioned the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service, they put them in harm's way. We had the high ground. We would have had concentrated fire. It would have been over real quick.
Meaning you guys would have shot the Bureau of
Yeah,
Land.
if they would have started firing
That's a
upon
federal
us.
agency. They would have killed you all.
Well, there was a lot of firearms there that nobody knows. This court doesn't even know about. Okay, there was tremendous firepower there. I don't even know their names. So,
wow.
But there was tremendous firepower there. I personally believe they wanted to sacrifice those BLM agents, and that would have given carte blanche to come in, the whole federal
Kill
government come in, and yes. In fact, myself and Lieutenant Colonel Roy Potter actually did a video on that very thing, that was meant to be a false flag. And I am to this day 100% convinced that's what they really want. That was what they're truly pushing for. Because here to tarmac, here at McCarran International Airport, you had Eric Holder showed up, you had Harry Reid there.
The day of this incident.
Yeah, it was like the day before. And you had Gillespie on the tarmac. So what was that all about? Okay, there was something else going on there. And I personally believe, and there's not just me, there's a lot of people are convinced that was supposed to be a false flag.
Well, when you say false flag, I'm thinking of something like, if, let's say, Saudi Arabia planned 9/11 and then they blame it on Al-Qaeda, or let's say, someone other than Stephen Paddock.
Very close to the same thing.
Blame it on the other guy. How is this going to be a false flag? Who are they going to blame it on?
Here's what's really interesting. You got to have a fall guy. You got to have a shooter. You got to have a patsy.
There's just going to be an entrapment scheme to entrap you guys.
Yes, one person from one side, who knows, had to take the shot. It never happened. I personally think I know who it was, but it just never happened. Okay? And I think I even know why it never happened. I'm not going to mention any names here on that particular thing. But had you had one shot, even a backfire from a vehicle,
right,
you would have had several hundred dead people just like that.
So how does there was the whole issue in Oregon as well, and the break-in at some federal building, and Roy Finnegan getting shot. How did that all play into this? Well,
the Bundys realized this wasn't going away. And they saw it happening all over this country, all right? And you had another high-profile case with the Dwight and Stephen Hammond Ranch, all right? And Hammond went there and did some research and some investigation and started getting that information out, what was going on. So then there was a whole lot of people who were interested in putting a stop to that. Initially, everybody went up for a protest.
Right.
To protest the Hammonds going to spend the remainder of their charges in prison. It was not quite 5. One was 4 years. I think the other one's 4 years and 7 months or something like that. Double jeopardy. So that got a lot of attention real fast from across the country, and so we all, the call went out on social media for all patriots to head that direction. There was going to be a protest.
This is where they are trying to say that you guys were spreading false information by putting things on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and stuff like that.
Yeah. Of course, social media is real news. Everything else is fake news, So,
well, I think it depends on who's putting the information there.
Sure, absolutely.
It is a good source of real news.
It's awesome source, and the federal government finally has recognized it too in these courts.
Right.
So I mean, they're using that to prosecute a lot of us. They're calling us unindicted co-conspirators, you know, the stuff that we put out on social media, which I just find it really fascinating. All of a sudden it's real news and mainstream media is fake news, you know.
But it's interesting that they're using that to call even the people that were reporting on it co-conspirators.
Yes.
Because I'm experiencing something similar
Yeah.
in a totally unrelated way. We do a broadcast that shows that someone is committing fraud, and then that someone turns around and brings a defamation lawsuit against me and the other people involved in bringing that evidence forward. So it's interesting how the government, I mean, and this person who's doing it claims to be a former CIA agent. So it's interesting to see how they try to use that against us as a weapon. Social media is a way that we the people can all come together and share information outside of this billion-dollar corporate controlled media.
Well, that is the true First Amendment rights right there. And this court's trying to use the First Amendment rights against us as evidence of conspiracy against the federal government.
Yeah, you try to speak out and try to arrange a demonstration, and they say, oh, you're conspiring.
Conspiring, yeah. And it's really an abuse. It's even an abuse of the original conspiracy cases that took place, you know, with Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War. And that one there was actually a conspiracy, and they actually did take things that the Enclave Clause provided the Constitution, such as ports, docks, courts, during the Civil War. That actually did take place, and there was a conspiracy to take over those federal buildings, okay? And they did. They actually did take it, all right? So here, they've changed the whole idea of conspiracy. Before, there was an actual crime committed. Now, the conspiracy is the actual crime. And rather than showing there was a crime committed, and all these people conspired to do it, now what they're saying is if anybody even thinks that way, that is the crime. And so they have to prove conspiracy. So this whole thing is asked backwards from the way it originally started.
They're calling a crime. Just speaking, it's
asked backwards from the way this whole thing originally got started, these conspiracy charges. Yeah, and conspiracy it is very, very difficult to prove, because you have a jury of 12 people up there that understand what they're trying to do is mind control. They understand that. Throw a wet blanket over everybody so they won't speak their minds anymore. That's what it's all about.
Okay, so you spoke about the takeover of federal buildings. How did that occur? Who was involved in that, and what initiated that? Well,
you have the Malheur Refuge,
because I have to tell you something. That strikes me as something that the cops would shoot you for.
Well, it gets real interesting because the Malheur Refuge actually, in a basic Congress in a congressional act in 1932, mandated that Malheur Refuge be liquidated as soon as possible, and those are the exact words, and invites adverse possession. Okay, adverse possession, again, is you stake your claim, you defend it, and you get beneficial use from it. All right, so way back when, Congress mandated or invited adverse possession. All right, it never happened.
What does that mean, adverse possession?
Adverse possession is just like squatters' rights. It's really no different.
So Congress is calling for somebody to go in there and just take the place over?
Yes, that was a congressional act back in 1932.
Why would they do that?
Because they understood that they did not Congress understood at that time the Enclave Clause only provided 10 square miles, Washington, D.C., and the mandated 18 expenditures that they could expend money on, which had to be for forts, docks, magazines, arsenals, and buildings like post offices. That is only money that could be spent. Now, if it's in a state, they had to get the state legislature to okay it, and then Congress had to buy it. See, and so none of that actually happened. So they backed off and they said, okay, we invite adverse possession, because there's nothing in the Constitution that allowed them to take that refuge. So, and then a lot of weird stuff happened in between then with your different government agencies, and it really gets weird. It's some of the stuff that we're investigating while we was up there, they just took it upon their, Teddy Roosevelt took it upon himself, I'm gonna, you know, this is all gonna be for one big refuge. The federal government went in there and started forcing ranchers out, flooding them out, all kinds of nefarious different things is what they did. So then that whole thing got forgotten as far as the Malheur Refuge and adverse possession. Well, somebody did their research, and I'm gonna say it was Ammon Bundy, did some tremendous research, because what happened is in the trials up there in Oregon, there was a motion, an emergency motion was filed with all that information on it that Anna J. Brown did get it. What did she say? The jurisdiction of this court will not be challenged. That's all she would say about it. All right, and that went, and that is still before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. It's never been addressed. So Ammon evidently did his homework, and he understood. So we went up there for this protest, and then this information began disseminated, and there was other things that got involved with it. For example, we found in the government files the entire Dwight Hammond portfolio, so to speak, all the information what had been taking place there, and other ranchers who had also been forced out. One was very, very interesting because he was still there and he didn't realize what had happened. He had a small ranch that was right there next to the refuge. He had some months before been arrested for animal cruelty. Well, he was a horse trader, and what horse traders do is they get old horses, they do the best they can to fatten them, then they take them to market in Mexico, and that was his primary source of income. He also had 50 head of cattle. Well, there was some false claim that nobody ever even backed up that he was starving his horses. So what they do, they went and arrested him. They arrested him, threw him in jail, didn't even let him talk to his attorney for 3 months. So he finally was able to give one phone call. He called his friend, said, sell everything you can on that ranch and get me an attorney. All right. So he sold everything, so it's no longer a working ranch. He took his horses and they took his cattle. And it turns out it was the sheriff's son that got the cattle. And he claimed it because he had to feed them. So they stole everything the man had, basically. Wow. So he comes over and he talks to us. He tells us his whole story. He said we're starving to death over there. He's living in a fifth wheel. He doesn't have any money, doesn't have any food, doesn't have any power. He has nothing. He's getting down to like 10, 15 below, and he wanted to know if we could help him. Right. So we got a bunch of people together and got a bunch of food together, went over and helped him out, okay? And then he started telling his story. Well, his file was also there at the refuge, so he pulled up the file on the man and his ranch. Turns out that his ranch sits on one of the largest known aquathermal springs, and is below the surface and is incredibly valuable. Well, the BLM knew about that. So what they did is they got together with the sheriff, got this man arrested, approached the owner that was carrying the paper. Now, mind you, this rancher hadn't been paying on his ranch for 10 years. He had 2 years left to pay on it. They put him in jail. The BLM goes to the people that are carrying the paper on this ranch, and they actually sold him out from under him for millions of dollars.
It's amazing,
yeah,
things that they're up to.
And then we found that out too.
So then, how did that lead to the takeover of the federal building?
Well, okay, we started off in Burns, which is 35 miles from the Malheur Refuge. We had the big protest, all right? The fact of the matter is they're still taking Dwight and Stephen Hammond to prison for total bogus charges. You know, even if it did, catch this, okay, we know who started the fire. It wasn't in the Dwight and Stephen Hammond. It wasn't a lightning strike, but it was actually the BLM. 130 acres, so many acres got burned. Dwight and Stephen Hammond actually owned the grazing and water rights on that public land, so they actually just burned up their own grazing. So they didn't do anything wrong, but okay, so they're still going to go to prison.
Why would they burn it? Is that part of farming?
They do that too. In this particular case, that was not what's taken place, but it is a practice, a normal practice. It goes back hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, with the indigenous peoples, that they would burn it off in the fall or even in the spring, and then let the new growth come in, which is much more beneficial for the cattle.
But these guys didn't actually burn it.
In this case, they were actually trying to stop a backfire from burning their ranch house, or burning everything. Okay, and they understood it at the time. They thought it was a lightning strike, but it turns out it was a BLM with drip torches. Actually went out and started to fire all the way around the ranch to burn them out.
We have evidence of that?
Yeah, we got sworn I sat there and listened to 2 outfitters swear, and we got them on video that they saw it with their own 2 eyes.
Video deposition
and
of
they
eyewitnesses.
actually videoed it themselves.
They videoed the activity.
So
they have video evidence of the Bureau of Land Management setting the fires.
Yes.
Has that been submitted to a court anywhere?
It was submitted to Papagni, the prosecuting attorney up there, and they buried it. And Papagni actually came out and threatened them personally.
Can those guys release that video on the internet?
Well, that's a real interesting thing. Since everything has taken place, there's a lot of that stuff. I don't know where it is. I never did know where that was, but I know it exists. I sit there and listen to the two outfitters tell the whole story.
Wow.
All right. So there's actually a lot of stuff that got out of there and got disseminated. I do not know where a lot of it is. Personally.
I'll tell you, this is another place where the concept of crowdsource the truth can hopefully help. If those people with that video, or anyone who has access to that video, is watching right now, they can email the video or they can contact me, truth@crowdsourcethetruth.org, and we'll release it. We'll put it up.
Well, remember, these guys were personally threatened by the prosecuting, drove out to their homes and personally threatened them. So
I'll videotape that too.
Videotape, well, it just goes, I mean, you know, it took them a long time to come out and see us. We had heard rumors about this, and we kept asking around. We finally found out who the two, from another rancher, who those 2 individuals were. They did not want to come out and talk to us immediately. They were very fearful for their lives. They finally did. Now, since that time, look what's happened. They murdered Lavoy Finnegan. Look at all the people that have been in prison. Up there in in Harney County, you still have a mercenary presence with the FBI under a program. What do they call that program? I can't even remember the name of it.
JTTF?
No, it's not that one. It's where the FBI can subcontract mercenaries to do their dirty work. Okay, I forget the name of it. I might think of it, but they're still there. There's people, locals still complain about them, and they went in and they were actually going door to door looking for people that were any way involved with what was taking place at the refuge. Locals. Wow. So there's a fear factor there that has to be accounted for.
Just trying to intimidate everybody.
It was all intimidation.
Let me ask you something about Roy, because like I said, I got a lot of emails last night, even just from the video we did right out here, and most of them were very positive, supporting the Bundys.
Sure.
Some were saying, hey, here's this video of Lavoy, and he broke through a police barrier, and he reached for his belt, and what about those aspects?
Well, there was a field analysis, forensics analysis, a very good one that was done on that anybody can go find on YouTube. That was a violation of, it was a dead man stop, which is a violation of state and federal law. And what that means is he was never given enough distance and therefore enough time to be able to stop where they actually said it. It's a dead man's curb, all right? And so when they pulled him over, you had in that vehicle, you had Lavoy, you had Ryan Payne, Ryan Bundy, Shauna Cox, and Victoria Sharp. Okay, you had 5 people in there. When they pulled them over, they pulled them over in unmarked vehicles. Who are these people? And they originally would not even identify themselves for some time.
The agents, the federal agents.
They said they were Oregon State Police, but they finally did say Oregon State Police. Now, Ryan Payne put his hands out the window to show that he was not armed. They told him, put your hands out the window, put your hands out the window. He saw the red dot, and the red dot, while he's looking, actually crossed his eyeball.
Laser sight.
The laser. And I got this directly from his girlfriend that told him, Ariel. Okay. Jumped back in as quick, just as they shot, and they hit the mirror.
So they're trying to shoot him.
Trying to shoot him. So they had already made a shot then that Lavoy was totally aware of course. So he kept saying there's women in here, don't shoot, there's women in here. So he decided to give himself up at that time, and there was a little bit of a debate between him and Lavoie on this whole thing. Ryan decided, I'm going to give myself up so we understand, so they weren't going to shoot anybody else. So he gives himself up, and they
Pretty brave.
And then Lavoie is telling him, you know what, we're going to go see the sheriff. We're going to go see the sheriff in Grant County. That's, what is his name? Sheriff Palmer in Grant County. He's telling him repeatedly, that's where we're going to go, okay? So after they shot, and he tells them that's where we're going to go, then he takes off. Okay, they're chasing him. So he's only got so many miles. He'll be in Grant County, and this particular sheriff, Sheriff Ward, and the FBI has no jurisdiction in Grant County. None. Okay. Zero. Which is interesting why they have jurisdiction in Harney County, which a lot of people don't know. But they know that Grant County is a UN-free zone. This came out in the investigation. That's why they decided to set up where they did, where the FBI agent is actually quoted that Grant County is a UN-free zone.
What is UN in this case?
United Nations.
Oh, it is United.
Yeah, yeah. Those there were mercenaries there, UN mercenaries that were actually there. We know that now. So anyhow, so he's going to Grant County, and at a high rate of speed, and even before quite a bit of distance before he can even see what's going on, they start shooting. Okay, and this is in that field's forensics. And it's acoustical and other things are involved in there, but they started shooting and hitting the windshield. And if you watch the video, you can say, hang on, they're shooting. All right. So he takes evasive action as best he can at that speed and that distance, and he ends up in the snowbank. All right. It wasn't trying to bust through. It wasn't trying to hurt anybody. It's just because of the way they set this illegal stop up, that was the outcome.
In the video that I saw, he comes out with his hands up, but he does appear to reach for his belt, and then he's shot. What happened there? We'll never know?
Actually, we do know.
Okay.
And it is pretty interesting. I got my theory, which differs a little bit from the other theories, but he goes with, we know from the video footage that as soon as he steps out, there's
like an aerial.
There's a shot fired. It blows out the one window. Just as soon as he steps out, it blows out the one window.
So they're already shooting.
Then there's another shot fired that comes down, and you can see it in slow motion. You can actually see the stuff come out, and that's when it hits, we believe, hits Ryan Bundy, which he still has a bullet in his shoulder too. Okay, so they started shooting immediately, and that's HRT, Hostage Rescue Team, the FBI, that started the shooting.
Who do they presume are hostages? The people in the car?
Well, it's HRT, but it has nothing to do with hostages. Nothing at all. Okay, it's supposed to be their elite sniper group.
Got it.
Is what it is. So they started shooting at him immediately. Now, when Lavoie steps out, there's, in this forensics that you'll see, he possibly had already been hit. But we do know that when he get the bullet where he when he goes down with his hands like this, that there's an exit wound right there.
Oh, so his hands go down because he's been shot.
It's a natural reaction. It's anytime you get hurt, where does your hands go?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I hurt my knee. You know what? Oh, I hurt my head. Okay, it's a natural reaction. There's an exit wound there. His hands go down.
There's been an autopsy.
There's two autopsies. The family did a private autopsy, and then they got the government's supposed official autopsy. But even with the official autopsy, we have not seen anything on the private autopsy that the family has done. But they sound like they're very close from just a little I have heard. But in the official autopsy, we have an exit wound right there.
Wow.
Okay, so that's his hands. Every time he get hit, his hands would go up, and he'd try and put them, go down, and he'd try and put them back up, and he'd get shot again. Okay, so now this where it does get kind of interesting. There is a discrepancy, from what I understand, on the official autopsy, the number of entrance and exit wounds. So that's something yet to be seen. But if you look at the field forensics and the video that goes along with it, it's very obvious that his hands were going to where he had just been shot, or where at least where the exit wound came out.
It's a very interesting explanation. I'm learning so much about this. I really appreciate you taking the time. Now, one other thing I wanted to ask you about. I saw you last night and then again this morning. I've actually got a little video of it right here of you sort of blowing what looks like a shofar. I'm just going to play that so that the members of our audience can see what I'm talking about. Now, forgive me, you don't look Jewish. What's that all about?
Well, it doesn't. It really doesn't have to be anything to do with Jewish, but if you read Numbers chapter 10, verses 8 and 9, it's a real good, concise explanation of why I do that. There's a promise there from God that when you blow the shofar, you'd be held in remembrance, and you'll be delivered from your enemies. And I started that like 7 years ago. It's actually just kind of blossomed into a ministry. I call myself a spiritually ordained Messianic rabbi, all right? And I have done that all over the place. I've blown that shofar. But there are promises that come with it, and I believe personally I've seen the fruits of those promises. We've been delivered from our enemies in Oregon. So far we've been delivered from our enemies here, and I totally expect to continue to be delivered from our enemies.
So do you think when people come out of that courtroom later today, we're going to hear that the case has been dismissed?
I won't go so far as saying that. I've been very accurate in the things that I have said up to this point. In fact, but I'm not the only one. John Lamb and I both were telling everybody in Oregon, all the media outlets, that they weren't going to be found guilty. And of course that fell on deaf ears. Even a lot of the people who are with us couldn't believe that. So, but ultimately, I don't know if it'll happen today, but I will say ultimately we will win this. They will be found not guilty, and they will be going home to their families. Okay. Despite the deep state and all their plans.
Well, you know, we had expected there to be a lunch break sort of any moment, and I thought this might be our central hub here. I don't really see anybody coming out just yet.
You don't know about the times they change. Sometimes they're fairly close. But it kind of depends on how deep the discussions get in there, or whether they let them out or not.
Right.
I mean, they do get carried away in there. There's a couple of times we went to like 1 o'clock before the.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I think we've had a really enlightening discussion. I appreciate you taking the time to educate me about these things. And
well, thank you for giving me a voice.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Brand. I really do. It's
You
been a
betcha.
pleasure meeting you, my friend.
Thank you.
Is there a website or anything that you want people to go to get more information?
Roy Potter QA, that's all lowercase. He's a brilliant man. He's a former lieutenant colonel. He worked directly under Petraeus, 28 years of military intelligence, and he has a firm grasp of the things that's going on in this country. He's an amazing man.
Isn't David Petraeus a possibly dangerous guy?
Yeah, very possibly. Yeah, see, that kind of gives you an idea where Roy Potter QA started making certain decisions. He started seeing the deep state. He saw the
So he left David Petraeus.
Yeah,
got it.
The generals and commanders. Well, he was very vocal with some of the policies that were coming down. Like we're going to invade 7 countries in 5 years.
Right.
That sort of stuff. He saw which direction that was going. He became very vocal, and he lost his commission, and they just dumped him.
So he's kind of fighting David Petraeus now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds like my kind of guy.
He is. They've been after him, and oh man, that guy's lived with me off and on a few times for up to a year, and they've been trying to capture him, and he's been doing a great job staying away from them.
You know, we've got 620 people watching us live right now on YouTube alone. Let me just take a little look here and see if we've got any questions from our live audience.
Okay, that'd be good.
Okay.
I like questions.
People are glad that we asked about the shofar. Let's see. Well, so you know, we spoke yesterday with Larry.
With who?
With Larry from Freedom Watch.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Do you know him? Have you dealt with him?
I may have. I don't know.
Okay. Well, there were a lot of good people coming out there. Don't seem to be a lot of questions coming up right now, unfortunately, but I think this has been a very enlightening interview. They say, someone's saying all Bundy had to do was pay the agreed to land fees. Instead, he refused to pay his rent, and the whole conflagration took place. What do you say to that?
Can I address that?
Yes, please.
Okay, Cliven always paid his grazing fees. He paid them to Clark County, Nevada. Clark County, Nevada is the one that has jurisdiction over that, just like any other business. Okay, you got a tax. And in this case, it's grazing fees, and he always paid them to Clark County, Nevada. Now, what happened is, in the past, Clark County, Nevada would go and give 12.5% of that to the Bureau of Land Management, which paid their expenses and all the services that they're providing for the ranchers. Now, and it's on a contractual basis. The rancher, okay, I got ahead of myself. In the early 90s, they changed that, and the federal government said, no, you got to give us all the money. And Cliven did initially, all right, and it was on a contractual basis. They had a contract that the Bureau of Land Management would provide certain services. Well, those services midstream changed. Okay, now we're not.
How did they change?
Okay, we're not providing a service anymore, but what you're going to do is you're going to take 50% of your cattle off the range. Okay, well, how am I going to run a ranch and have any profit? I'm going to go bankrupt.
With half the
So
cattle.
he decided that he would not renew his contract with the Bureau of Land Management, but he was totally paid up, totally current until the contract was over with. And that's just mainstream media propaganda that they put out constantly.
Right, right. And so now we've got someone saying, do you know Dennis Michael Lynch, who was there making a documentary?
Yes. In fact, Dennis, Michael Lynch, and myself, for the longest time, were side by side, and we could account for every minute that Sheriff Tom Jenkins was there, which both Michael Lynch and myself came out and called him on the carpet for some of the lies that he was telling. So yeah, I'm very familiar with Dennis Michael Lynch.
Okay.
Good man, by the way.
Someone named Kitty is saying there is no contract whereby the Bundys are owed a rent. I don't know if that's correct. Yeah, I don't know if she's understanding the situation correctly.
Cliven was officially denied.
Okay.
Officially denied?
Officially denied, yeah, pretrial release. So we expected that. That's no big surprise.
So people have come out of the courthouse now and are giving us some updates, right? Okay.
So anyhow, to address that contract thing, yes.
Is there anything that you guys want to add?
I just want to introduce myself to you. Excuse me. Cindy
Hello.
Lake. I've been following you. And sending you messages and
lovely to meet you, Cindy.
For you and
well,
would you like to pull up a chair?
We should definitely.
No, not yet.
We'll talk after this. Thank you, Cindy. Good to see you.
Let me add real quick what Brand was talking about.
Sure.
It's being called the tortoise two-step as far as preemptive rights on the land. And I made comment as to a response in one of my videos that somebody said that if somebody doesn't pay their rent and after 20 years and gets kicked out, so I put it in his terms. I may not have said it exactly right, but Cliven Bundy owns the grass. I said the backyard, but Cliven owns the grass and the water on that property. And that's what Brand was talking about.
Yeah, an interesting thing is the 20-year is the government's newfound powers where they